This is WJOU 90.1 FM Huntsville, serving the Tennessee Valley, a broadcast service of Oakwood University, on the web at wjou.org.
Good afternoon and welcome to Second Chance. Second Chance is a weekly talk show that examines a wide range of social issues and seeks to inspire physical, emotional, social, and spiritual healing, believing that God is a God of second chances, and through faith, all things are possible. Second Chance airs live each week from the beautiful campus of Oakwood University and features real people with real issues and offers real answers. And now, here's your host, Kenneth Anderson.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Second Chance radio broadcast. I'm Kenny Anderson. It's always delighted to be here with you, sharing information and inspiration through the broadcast and the ministry of the Second Chance radio broadcast, now with you for over 35 years. And I'm just grateful to continue to have a platform and a voice that we can be able to share positive, uplifting, and inspirational messages with you. On Sundays from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, we join you for conversations with a variety of different guests. And I have a special series of guests on today as we continue to celebrate Black History Month 2026. And we also have an opportunity to acknowledge the fact that it is a Super Sunday indeed, because the Super Bowl will be played later on today. I'll have some fun facts about the Super Bowl a little bit later in the broadcast today. But I want to go ahead and get started right away by bringing my first guest in. He has been on this broadcast before. And of course, when he came on the first time, he elevated the platform. And so I'm just so grateful that he has returned for an additional dialogue at this time. Let me introduce him. He's Dr. Jerome Crichton. He's the author of Spitting in the Wind, White Pathology and the Struggle for Racial Habilitation. And I will proudly show you my copy of the book. Thank you, Dr. Crichton, for this extraordinary gift. He is also adjunct professor of psychology at Alliant International University in Diablo Valley Community College in the San Francisco Bay Area and senior pastor at Every Word Ministries in Brentwood, California. Dr. Crichton, we welcome you back to the Second Chance radio broadcast.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here with you, Kenny. Let me just add to the list of your fun facts. I did grow up in Boston, and I am a New England Patriot fan, and I'm looking forward to what happens.
Well, blessings to you, and we'll see what happens. It should be an interesting game. Of course, the Patriots have gone a lot deeper into this than many people thought, and the Seattle Seahawks have been notoriously ready to show up for the big stage, as has New England. Of course, you guys have definitely shown us the way in terms of those football fans who are looking for excellence. So I definitely acknowledge that at this time. As a New York Giants fan, by the way, I'll kind of throw that in.
Well, let me thank you. Without you, we wouldn't have 6 Super Bowls. So
that's right.
We would have 8. But
that's right. Absolutely. I am so excited to talk to you. This is actually the first of a couple of conversations that Dr. Crichton and I will have during the month of February, and then, of course, beyond. But wanted to definitely leverage the opportunity to bring him back and talk about the book that he has published. And it's very exciting to see it in print, and very excited to turn the pages as well. We have a short period of time to get into this today, so let's dive right in, Dr. Crichton, and let's talk a little bit first about the central thesis of this particular publication. Focuses around the notion of hurt people hurting people, and the consequence of that being a pathology that then impacts people in society in a variety of ways. Of course, you're focusing on the racial elements of this, But talk to me a little bit about what drove you to this particular focus as a topic of discussion for this book.
Well, I was asked to teach a class entitled Sociocultural Diversity, African American Psychology by a colleague, Mike Connor, who was going on sabbatical. And then I learned later that when he returned, he would be retiring. So essentially was setting me up to take the course, which is what we're supposed to do for each other. And I'm so thankful for Mike. May he rest in peace. I taught it one semester, and after that semester, I realized that absent from my design was number one, the African American church, and number two, the causes, the primary causes, or not necessarily primary, but amongst the primary causes of Black behavior, which of course is white oppression. In other words, broadly defined psychology is why people behave the way they behave, why they have the attitudes they have. What are the factors? And the major factor is white oppression. So in order to get to the bottom of it, I had to begin to study the behavior of white people. And in reflection, I remember, all throughout my life, people asking me as if I knew, what's wrong with white people, man? What's wrong with them? Even up to very recently. And so I set out to try and understand the psyche, the mind, the behaviors, the attitudes. And so that was the catalyst.
There is a element of human nature that pushes back against an element of blame. And I will say in this context, assignment of a cause, that there's an element of human nature that wants to deflect and perhaps even in some instances, scapegoat these kinds of findings. Talk to me a little bit about, as you have dug into this research, what elements that have you found that have grounded you in your belief that this is the source of this particular challenge?
Well, first of all, let me say that it is a theoretical approach, and we shouldn't be afraid of the word theoretical. Theories help to explain a lot of things, but they also leave room for more exploration. And, if we understood this in theology, we would be doing a whole lot better than having to have dealt with the kind of dogmatism that has been very oppressive to a lot of people, right, across many group distinctions. So it is a theoretical approach. However, it is rooted in history, it's rooted in sociology, it's rooted in experience, and a number of other disciplines. I mean, we wouldn't be able to get very far without philosophy. So that's a part of it too, and also theology. So taking all of those elements together in an interdisciplinary approach, this is what I have come to in terms of my theory. We can trace patterns in all of those disciplines that have led me to this particular conclusion.
Define for us white pathology.
White pathology is an aberrant behavior that centers in Eurocentrism, and it is, characteristics of it are wanting to name, to control, to define, this sort of belief that God has endowed Europeans to determine what the standard of things are, be it standards of beauty, intelligence, or whatever else you might want to name. But it is the consequence of hundreds of years of historical, sociological, psychological, theological evolution that have contributed to this worldview that can be summarized in this proclivity to oppress.
Talk to me a little bit about, I was reading recently and I know you talked a lot about this, just the social determinants of behavior, and the idea that a lot of people see the consequences of Black people and other people of color who are living lives in marginalized conditions, in substandard conditions, oftentimes, who are put into situations by necessity as opposed to desire. Talk to me a little bit about this whole notion of the impact of those social determinants on people's lives and how they result in, ultimately, sometimes, the outcome of shorter lifespans, health issues and conditions, disparities in education, and more.
Yeah, that's a huge, huge subject. And I need to tread very carefully here because, within this, you have the debate between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, and so much more. That's just a part of it. Some people, as a matter of human phenomenon, in any population that you go to, will respond in one way to trauma and other people to another way. They'll respond in another way to trauma. When we try and make these generalizations, it becomes crazy. It is just very difficult. Some Africans brought to the United States or to America, to the shores of America and to the West Indies and Brazil, man, they responded well. They were resilient. They took straw and made bricks out of them. Others didn't respond so well. And we see that even today. Some people have just not, at a generational level, been able to respond well. So when we start to try to pick here and there, and generalize, it becomes, it's a slippery slope. But what I can say is that we have enough data that shows that in general terms, the response to oppression, it contributes to poor health outcomes, hypertension, mental health issues, hypervigilance, just so much. And Dr. David Williams has done such a great job. Dr. David Williams of Harvard University and Adventist has done outstanding work in that area. So there's a lot to try to pull together. And I want to be careful not to paint with a broad brush what has resulted, because there are segments within our population, wherever you go, who have been very resilient and done very well. And then there are others who have not done so well.
What do we learn from that dichotomy? Or what can we learn from that dichotomy?
That we have a responsibility to help each other, that we are our brother's keeper, that we have to be careful that we don't so buy into the standards that have, the fictive standards that have been propped up by Europeans, that we, internalize this racism and start hating each other and doing things to each other, under the guise of, you're lazy, you just don't want to work hard. Look, as you may have already known, because you've known more about me than many others, I'm going to call it like I see it. There has been this divide between West Indians and Americans, and Africans and Americans and so on. I think so much of that is superficial, and it is just the result of people not really doing the historical study to understand how the oppressions that existed in different parts of the world differed. So the kind of oppression that was in the West Indies is different from what happened here. In the West Indies, they were not forbidden to read and write. It's just different levels and types of oppression. But when you understand the history, I think you're in a better position to understand the big picture and not just to try and prop one group up over against the other.
The book is titled Spitting into the Wind, white pathology and the struggle for racial habilitation. People might be familiar with the word rehabilitation, but not quite as familiar with the word habilitation. So talk to me a little bit about that word and how you're applying it in this context.
Yeah, so I was struggling to come to a title, and what came first to my mind was this idea of how, many of these white evangelical churches who are filled with people who are either liberal white people, no, I shouldn't say filled with, but there are those amongst them who are considered liberal white people or egalitarian. And they have a desire for some form of unity, and they talk a lot about reconciliation. And what they often miss is that there has to have been conciliation before you can have reconciliation. And that brought me to the concept of habilitation over against rehabilitation. There has never, from my study and reading of history, there has never been a time when white people have been habilitated relative to their relationship to non-white people. So there has to be a first. And so the book speaks about the first, this first opportunity to exist in a space where the worldview and the actions and behaviors and attitudes are human towards people who are not white. And I know this is a broad generalization. There does need to be perhaps a little qualification here, which is that what I'm saying essentially is that white people, through no fault of their own necessarily, are socialized into a pathology. Nobody chooses where they're going to be born, who they're going to be born from, what time they're going to come into this earth, what their physical stature or physiognomy is going to be like. Nobody chooses that. But we cannot avoid the fact that white people are socialized into a pathology of racism. So even the best and the most egalitarian and liberal amongst them are products of that socialization. That is the perspective from which I'm speaking. It is not to say that there are not well-meaning white folks. It is not to say that there are not allies. It is just to say that the reality we are in is a socialization which results in implicit or unconscious racism.
You reference two things. You reference something that you identify as historical narcissism and manufactured amnesia. Talk a little bit about how you apply those things in the context of this broader conversation.
Yes, so when people are socialized historically, through textbooks, through the education, through the institutions, through history, and most especially through media, to see themselves as being better than people who are not white, the natural consequence of that is a type of narcissism. And it exists on a spectrum. So in somebody like Donald Trump, you see it maxing out, right? Whereas in other people who may not, overtly spew racial hatred and division and what have you, it is obviously not as acute. It's not necessarily absent, it's just not as acute. So these are byproducts of social conditioning.
Talk to me a little bit about the concept of fragility. It's a word that we've talked about, we've heard about, it's been written about, in fact, very famously in some instances, and yet it continues to be a type of bone of contention at times whenever it's raised. I've been in meetings, in fact, in forums where someone has sort of taken a defensive posture about fragility, a white fragility in particular. And it's typically a white person who feels very much like they align themselves with values that are similar to people who might be Black, that they are not the mean-spirited, angry, narcissistic person. And they push back against that to the point of saying it just doesn't exist. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I guess the notion of white fragility was popularized by Robin DiAngelo. Now, I don't think she originated the term. It existed, at least conceptually, long before she wrote about it, but in that she was white and wrote about it, she was able to gain an audience that was not accessible to Black authors who had long written about it, going all the way back to Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, David Walker. I mean, we could go way, 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 way back. But essentially, it, our audience might best understand it from the perspective of the defense mechanisms that were popularized by Sigmund Freud, right? Denial, deflection, right? Being defensive, so that when something is brought up that brings anxiety to the ego, the natural response is to defend the ego from a Freudian perspective. And that's where the fragility comes in. It's a way of protecting the self. If you feel a little less honorable, a little less worthy, a little more exposed, a little bit more anxious, then the response is that of fragility, and it can show in many different ways. It can show as microaggressions. It can show as overt hostility. It can show in facial expressions, body language, many, many ways.
People are becoming a little bit more comfortable using words like fascism, authoritarianism, as a consequence of what they're seeing coming from this administration, with actions by ICE and other individuals as well, including the guardrails that don't seem to exist among some Congress members, Supreme Court members, etc., and their major concerns. Can you characterize what you feel you are seeing in society today in the context of what you have explored on this journey in this book?
I can, and I can say it both inside and outside of the book. Because they don't love the truth, they've been given over to a reprobate mind. So I don't need to use those descriptors. I'd rather come at it from a spiritual perspective. These people are reprobate. And people who try to soften the language and make room for the nonsense, they're living in some sort of an alternate reality. And this is kind of how the social engineering has taken place. So we're not supposed to believe that what we actually saw when we saw two white people, by the way, executed, right, in public in broad daylight, when we're supposed to wait for a report to come out. This is part of the white pathology, to tell you that you cannot make a conclusion about what you see until we tell you what you saw. And that goes back to the Rodney King beatings. No, we know what we saw. We don't need you to tell us what we saw. This is the classic biblical definition of a reprobate mind. There's not stronger language that can be used than the language of Paul.
As you think about this through your prism of theology and prophecy, how do you navigate the experiences that people are having right now that are in many instances incomprehensible, difficult to understand?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I really benefited so much from going back into reading the history of the atrocities that were committed against the Africans. So much so that it exhausted me and brought a lot of trauma to me, to the point where I had to stop doing the research. But there was a voice saying to me, no, I want you to look at it. I want you to look at it. I want you to look at it. So let me just say here, there's something to this idea that the Jews commemorate the Holocaust every year. Listen, man, you've got to look at it. It's hard. It's difficult. Some people can't watch 12 Years a Slave. I knew people who couldn't watch Roots. You've got to look at it. Because on the underside of the atrocities, there is this amazing resilience that is seen in people like Frederick Douglass and David Walker, W.E.B. Du Bois, Nat Turner, Martin King, and others. It defies comprehensibility for these people in the time that they lived to stand up the way that they did. But what was it that enabled them to do it? You know what I'm saying? They came face to face with something bigger than the obstacle that they were facing. So it's by being able to look at and sit with the atrocities, I think, that we're able to gain some sense of resilience to stand up against it. So what I say to people who are going through it right now is that they need to know that the greatest blessings that have come to us as a people, and I don't just mean people of African descent, but all oppressed people, has been when the atrocities have risen to their highest levels. And the psychological advantage that we have is that people like Donald Trump and Kristi Noem and Hegseth and Miller, they don't understand. They are the architects of their own destruction. And what they also don't realize, and what America needs to realize, is that we are witnessing the destruction of this so-called democracy. We are seeing the decimation of the Constitution, like, for example, with the arrest of Don Lemon and his fellow journalist. We're seeing what nobody thought could ever happen. And it was fragile because it was fictive. You see what I'm saying? It was fragile because it was fictive. When this declaration was made about we hold these truths to be, self-evident that all men are created equal, it wasn't written with Native Americans or Africans in mind, or even Irish or Jewish people. It was fictive from the very beginning. Now they tried to make it real, but in the words of Malcolm, the chickens are coming home to roost. And the question becomes for oppressed people, especially people of African descent, have we so positioned ourselves so that when they have burned their houses down, we're able to build?
These are definitely interesting times that we're living in. And unfortunately, I believe that a lot of people have not clearly defined the moment or clearly understood the moment. And it certainly bears attending to in this particular space and time. Dr. Crichton, we have maybe 2.5 minutes. I'm going to give you a chance to tell people where they can find the book. But my last question is this: what do you hope to gain by publishing this book and then contributing it to the world?
Yeah, so my book is published from my worldview, my perspective. I am a Christian, and I believe, in my faith in Christ. So I wanted that to be clear from the very beginning, even though I'm writing in the areas of psychology and sociology and Afrocentrism and African American psychology. So what I present in that is the opportunity of redemption, as I understand it, for people who love the Lord. Everybody is not going to take that, every white person especially is not going to take that book and say, you know what, I am afflicted by this pathology and I need to change. But there may be some. And this book provides the perspective of African people who have been oppressed, letting white people know what their experience has been, and providing them with an opportunity to initiate some type of healing. So it's just not a book about what you did, or it's not written from the perspective of being victimized. It is written from the perspective of holding out hope that subsequent generations will understand, and that they will not run from the history, that they will embrace critical race theory. They will embrace African American history, and they will not demonstrate the fragility and the defenses that just continue to erode whatever is left of the white conscience.
He's Dr. Jerome Crichton. The book is called Spitting into the Wind, White Pathology and the Struggle for Racial Habilitation. You should do as I have done. Get your copy of this, cozy up to it, read it, turn the pages, and benefit from the research that Dr. Crichton has shared with us. not just today, but through this publication and other publications that he has as well. As I said earlier in the broadcast, this is the first of 2 parts, and we're going to have him back later this month to continue this conversation because he's also a recording artist, and he has some really powerful messaging in that space as well. We're going to give him a chance to come back and do that. But Dr. Crichton, I know you got one more thing to say too, but make sure you let people know how they can get a copy of this particular publication.
Right. So in the spirit of our 4 parents, my book is only available on my website at www.drjeromeccrichton.com. Dr. Jerome C. Crichton.com. And the reason is because I'm not playing this game with Jeff Bezos and some of these other folk who are essentially pimping people out of their money. Why am I giving them 35 to 45% of my blood, sweat, and tears? They've done nothing to earn that. So I'm only selling that through my own website. And I want to encourage others to do likewise. And we need to have a conversation about how we can do for ourselves without giving our money to these people who are already taking it the best way they know how.
That is absolutely a guarantee that you're coming back beyond the next segment that we already have scheduled. So we look forward to that. The book, again, is Spitting into the Wind, White Pathology and the Struggle for Racial Habilitation. Dr. Jerome Crichton joins us this afternoon. Dr. Crichton, thank you for giving us this opportunity, and we look forward to talking to you again later this month.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you for your service to the community.
Thank you, my brother. Take care, man.
You too.
We're going to keep things rolling this afternoon because my next guest is up and ready to be heard this afternoon. That's why we have a radio broadcast so people can be heard. And I'm so excited and delighted that he has chosen to be with us on this afternoon. He's Dr. Yohuru Williams. He is Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. And I'm so glad to have him in the house today. He is also an author multiple times, has oftentimes seen on a variety of different stations, sharing his insight and perspective on a variety of different topics. He's been on this broadcast before, and again, he's a platform elevator. Welcome back to my broadcast, Dr. Yohuru Williams.
Good to see you, brother. How are you?
I'm doing great today. I'm just feeling it. You know, I'm here on the 8th day of February at Super Bowl Sunday. I'm pretty gassed about that. And I'm just excited about the fact that the blood is still circulating. The inspiration is still popping. The opportunities are still presenting themselves. And I'm just in a space of opportunity right now. And I just feel delighted and blessed.
I can appreciate that. That is a blessing. That is a blessing.
We have a lot to talk about and a lot to unpack this afternoon. So I will not delay this conversation in any way because I want to cover as much territory as possible. Dr. Williams has granted me a 1-hour presentation this afternoon. So we are going to dive deep into some things, folks. And I appreciate this opportunity to do so. You shared with me a publication, an article that you wrote on progressive.org. It's a police state in Minnesota. And to be on the ground in Minnesota, I would imagine, is a rather surreal experience for those who are participating and experiencing that right now, especially in light of everything that's going on. Talk to me a little bit generally, and I'm going to talk more specifically about some things about what's happening on the ground right now. What's the mood?
I think the mood here is very somber, Kenny, because we are in occupied territory right now. And I think it's difficult for people outside Minnesota to appreciate exactly what that means because legacy media hasn't done a very good job of documenting what people are experiencing. I don't think until maybe the last month since the killing of Renee Nicole Good, January 7th, and then the subsequent killing of Alex Preddy just last week, people really had a sense of how tense things were here on the ground, just how many federal agents are on the streets here, and what impact it's had on the economic and cultural sense of this city. People literally do not feel safe and secure in their persons and in their homes. We've had kidnappings, and I use that language deliberately because even in my own building, and I serve as the vice president of my residents association, I had a neighbor who was taken by ICE a few months ago, and we knew nothing of his whereabouts. And so literally when I say people are disappeared in the middle of the night or early in the morning, and there's no way to determine what happened to them, when you see violent assaults on U.S. citizens, despite what the Immigration and Customs Enforcement said that it was here for. And when you have administrators like Crichton and the recently deposed Greg Bovino, removed, I should say, and now Tom Homan, come in and literally lie about what's happening here on the ground. To the contrary of video that people have seen, you get some sense of just what we're experiencing here. We literally are living in a police state.
We've seen, some of us have seen the protests that are taking place in Minnesota on the ground. We see protests taking place in other cities as well. That has to be, in one sense, a point of inspiration to see so many people come together under the conditions, the weather conditions that people are experiencing, in order to make sure that their voices are heard. It's a true we the people moment, it feels, from where I sit watching in solidarity with what's going on. Talk to me about your thoughts about this collective effort of the voices of the people.
That's been the most inspiring part of this, Kenny, is that, one of the jokes about Minnesota, when I first moved here and I experienced this in a way that was a little unsettling, is unlike folks on the East Coast, it's very hard to tell where people are here at times. And they call it Minnesota nice, this kind of polite distancing that people will engage in with you. So you really never know where you stand. So folks are nice enough, but there's kind of no follow through. And if you're an outsider, you really don't feel like you're part of the community. And yet in this moment, and I would argue the same thing happened in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, you find out just how connected and just how interested people are here in the notion of protecting this community. And we saw this not only in the massive demonstrations, which are playing out weekly now at this point, and you're seeing people come from other parts of the country to support Minnesotans in their pushback against immigration and customs enforcement here. And I shouldn't say just, I think that taints in a way, this pushback against federal policy, which has been demeaning to human dignity and, the principles we associate with our democratic republic. But then also Minnesotans kind of leaning into our shared humanity. And this is what I've loved. The things that you won't see on the nightly news. So all of the mutual aid that's been administered, folks who are feeding those who are now at this point shut in because they fear interactions with immigration and customs enforcement, this intentional community, folks kind of banding together, thinking about ways that they can not only go out and demonstrate, but what are the legal challenges we can raise to the presence of ICE in our community? And how do we really work toward what Dr. King called the beloved community? One of the things that was great for me this year, every year I get an opportunity to speak somewhere on King Day. And this year I had an opportunity to, in a very concrete way, say to folks, if you want to understand the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, look no further than what's happening in Minnesota over the last 6 to 8 weeks, where you literally have seen people banding together and getting behind this idea that if we say we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, we better mean it, and we mean to stand for it here. So it's been pretty beautiful from that sense.
Yeah. Tell me, answer this question for me if you can. Why Minnesota? Why is this happening in Minnesota?
So it's a great question, brother, and a long answer here. So there are, I think, 3 concrete things that we can point to that put Minnesota on the national radar. First and foremost, we know that President Trump has a very long memory when it comes to perceived grievances, things that have been done to him by individuals or entities. And he carries out that revenge in a very deliberate and methodical way. Sometimes it appears clumsy, but one thing that you know is that if you wind up on the wrong side of the president's, you're on the wrong, ledger sheet for the president and on his hit list, you will pay. We saw that earlier this year with the revenge campaign against universities whom he felt wronged him, law firms whom he felt wronged him. And Minnesota's been on his radar because we know the president has claimed that he won Minnesota both in 2016 and then again in 2020, and that the election was stolen from him here. So we don't often hear the election denier rant about Minnesota. We hear it about Georgia and other places, but he said that about Minnesota. So he's alleged voter fraud here, which deprived him of the election. Not true. There's abundant evidence that not only did he lose Minnesota, he lost badly, but this is part of it. Secondly, Governor Walz ran against him as Kamala Harris's running mate, and on the campaign trail said things which the president views as slights. And again, very long memory when it comes to executing vengeance on those that oppose him in any way. And so we knew, Minnesotans knew, that eventually there was going to be payback if Walz and Harris lost. And when they lost, we knew that payback would be swift and it would be fierce. And so I think there was a lot of anticipation around Minnesota being in the crosshairs because of that. Number three, and I think this is probably a little less tangible for people, but I want to talk about it because it's important. Minnesota's, Minneapolis, St. Paul in particular. So Minnesota is a big state, but in terms of a metro area, and we saw the administration do this, they kind of walked this approach out in Los Angeles. And what they quickly discovered is it would be very hard to police a metropolitan area the size of a Los Angeles or the size of a New York. So they needed, almost like what we saw during the civil rights movement, where Dr. King and his colleagues chose Birmingham, Alabama. So it's like a reverse playbook. They said, well, we want to go to Birmingham because it's small enough for us to make a difference. We know that our nonviolent tactics will work there. And we've got a police commissioner, Eugene Bull Connor, who we know could have been plucked from central casting in terms of what we want to promote about everything that's wrong with segregation. In the same way, you saw the Trump administration, after they're rebuked in Los Angeles, him call out the National Guard in Washington, D.C., utilizing executive power to then use military for police in that city, that federal district, and then employing ICE here, utilizing similar arguments, but with a community that's small enough that, because we're feeling this, with 3,000 federal ICE agents deployed here, that's now more than the police department, the police forces, and the Twin Cities almost combined. So when you think about it that way, when I say we're an occupied army, that was part of this too. He wanted to make an example out of a municipal area, which in the imagination of most Americans is this large, thriving metropolis. Actually, I like to say, and I lived here, and I love it. Minneapolis, St. Paul is kind of a small town masquerading as a big city. And so there's also a warning in this, and I think we saw this after the killing of Alex Preddy, where the administration said, Attorney General Pam Bondi said, you want ICE out, fine, give us your voting rolls. This is less about Minnesota and more about sending a message to other communities. Unless you want ICE in your community, play ball, because this is what can happen to you. And I think in that sense, Minnesota is a canary in the coal mine for other communities. The fact that we fought back in the way that we have, I think, is important and instructive as well, because it says to other communities, you don't have to roll over. You can't resist.
You have referenced and talked about this contention of absolute immunity for actions that take place within the context of this chaos and confusion and violence perpetrated by ICE. Talk to me a little bit about the absurdity of that. And I really was trying not to say absurdity and define the message that you may give me, but I can't think of anything else except for that and a bunch of other words. But absurdity certainly sits right up there at the top, that the notion that these people can be extended absolute immunity just seems so profoundly absurd.
It's the only word to describe it, Kenny. And in fact, I'll go one step further and I'll say in this way, there's an arc to what's happening here that unless you're kind of deeply versed in Black history, and here we are at the 100th anniversary of Black History Month, beginning this month, the ways in which these things align. And specifically, I want to talk about that conversation about qualified immunity around constitutional policing. So ironically, if we go back to the murder of George Floyd in 2020, one of the arguments that was made against the Minneapolis police was that they were violating people's constitutional rights under the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, so on and so forth. And so therefore, in the aftermath of the urban unrest that took place here, you had this push for both a state consent decree to deal with race-based policing and a federal consent decree where the federal government would provide oversight, overseen by a judge, to hold Minneapolis police accountable for violations of constitutional policing. Now, the irony of that is the Trump administration comes in and they worked feverishly to try to get that consent decree finalized before Trump took office. They failed. And so when he came in, the president, the Department of Justice, did not finalize that consent decree. And so as we moved or inched closer to the 5th year anniversary of George Floyd, a couple of things happened that signal where we are today. First, in April of 2025, the president issued an executive order strengthening our Police Act, which said we need to take the handcuffs off of police, that we needed police to get more funding and actually to have more protections in doing their job and cracking down on violent criminals. So there's that executive order. A few days later, the federal government, the Attorney General's office, Department of Justice pulls out of that consent decree with the city of Minneapolis just 3 days shy of the 5th year anniversary of George Floyd. So that sent a message. So now not only has the federal government said we should take the handcuffs off police, now they've pulled out of an agreement about overseeing constitutional policing. And then we move to June in Los Angeles and we see the federal government violating constitutional. So this is the thing that we were looking for the feds to police. They're now violating in an American city. Fast forward to fast forward to September, and you get Trump and Hegseth in a meeting with high-level military commanders. And in that meeting, Hegseth says, we want you to know there is no rule book. Do whatever you want. And then the president of the United States says to those same military commanders, and perhaps we can even use American cities as training grounds. So you'll be able to use these American cities to learn how to. And we think about that. I'm putting all that history together. Fast forward to December and the commencement of Operation Metro Surge here in our community. And you had the perfect cocktail for the federal government now, instead of being the safeguard, the guardrail against abuses of constitutional policing, now engaging in clear violations of constitutional law, clear violations of due process, clear violations of illegal search and seizure. I mean, it's like clear, but then on top of it, having the vice president come in after the murder of Renee Nicole Good and suggest that officers who engage in this behavior have qualified immunity. In fact, he talked about it not in terms of qualified immunity, which is what most police officers have, but absolute immunity, meaning they could not be held accountable. And so, Kenny, I say this to you in earnestness, and I go back to where I began in the beginning of our conversation when I say we're living in a war zone. What you're really then talking about would be immunity from war crimes. People say, well, you're overstating that, Dr. Williams. I asked them, go back to Tom Homan's comments just a few days ago here in Minneapolis, where he came in and described our community as a theater of war. So they're actually now incorporating these military doctrines and these ideas into civilian policing in ways that are detrimental and fundamentally damaging to the architecture of our republic. Again, long answer, but I think people have to connect all those dots to really understand why what JD Vance said was so triggering to so many people, and why every American should be deeply concerned about what's happening here in Minneapolis, and why that as a principle and articulation should trouble everyone.
Over the weekend, an article came out that said that ICE is now saying that they can arrest people without warrants. That, of course, again, is something that should be deeply disturbing, because that is a true violation of one's constitutional rights. What are your thoughts about this new declaration? And does it, again, represent part of that slippery slope that they've been on for some time now?
The interesting thing is that they're doing everything in their power to allow ICE to act without any checks, without any safeguards whatsoever. And so when we move into that, and that was the central thesis of the article that I wrote with Michael Lansing, we are in a police state. Then you don't have any guardrails. And there have been a lot of comparisons made to the Trump administration and the rise of Adolf Hitler. Not to go into those, I just want to focus on one concretely that maps to what we're seeing in terms of ICE. When the president came in and immediately pardoned the J6 rioters, the people who engaged in violence against the U.S. Capitol. And then promptly after pardoning those J6 rioters, made a defense of their actions, right? We're in a questionable territory. But now then to empower a police force to act in this way, but only if they're loyal to him and executing federal authority in the way that he deems. We're now in this place where we're talking about something more akin to the brown shirts than we are to what we know as federal policing. These are individuals who are enacting the political whims and will of a leader disconnected from the Constitution and the rule book, which should animate their actions against American citizens. So again, it's easy for people to dismiss this, in particularly here, Operation Metro Surge, as being about what's happening to immigrants. But when you have two dead U.S. citizens whose civil rights were clearly violated. And when you have Trump now, I think, thumbing his nose at his own base, who worshiped the Second Amendment. And then when you have Alex Preddy, a lawful gun owner, shot down in the street, not reaching for his weapon is in his waistband. And Kristi Noem says, don't believe your lying eyes. He was out there to assassinate as many law enforcement officers as possible. And the truth comes out that he's a lawful gun owner. I think even the Second Amendment advocates and some of Trump's base looked at that and said, what's happening here? Then those historical comparisons allow us to say, this feels a lot like what Adolf Hitler did in Germany. And I also remind people, Donald Trump's second rise came beginning with J6, and people thought he lost and he got on a plane and he flew away. They forget Hitler's rise began with the beer hall putsch, which was a failure. But it was in prison that Hitler writes Mein Kampf, the politics of grievance, that then connects with people who he says, I will be your retribution against the bankers, against the Jews, against your enemies. I will make them pay. Same language that we heard from Trump on the campaign trail. And now we're looking at that playbook play out. And Mein Kampf is to Project 2025 in a lot of ways, even though Trump disavowed it in ways that people can kind of read through that document and say, man, they're executing everything that they said and more with sheer brutality. And Donald J. Trump is the face of it.
This is part of the manifestation of the thought that history will repeat itself if we're not reminded about the things of the past and that we don't implement those safeguards. I want to ask you about this, since we are talking about safeguards. Congress and its dubious response to so many of these things that are taking place, and also the judicial branch of the government, Supreme Court, which many people felt were our safeguards. It's like if, I reference him as the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. If the occupant of 1600 Avenue goes completely mad, we're still going to have those constitutional guardrails of hell by people in Congress and the Supreme Court. How are you feeling about that right now?
I'm deeply, deeply worried, Kenny, because what we've seen is, and I think this is part of the problem that going back to the election of Barack Obama, there was such an irrational and visceral response to a certain segment of this population to the election of a black man as president, that in the way that people talk about occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue syndrome, they should be talking about Barack Obama syndrome. It gave birth to the Tea Party and this kind of rabid politics of polarization that, if we want to look at the alt-right, even though these things existed before then, they kind of all came together. These streams came together in its opposition to Obama. Irrational in the fact that these individuals would rather destroy the own safeguard to their own liberty rather than see them extended in ways that at least our democratic principles and enterprise have indicated we should want to see them expanded. And so I say that because what's curious to me is that then you had a deliberate effort on the part of the Republican Party in embracing the Tea Party and embracing MAGA and embracing the Great Replacement theory and embracing the alt-right and elevating people like Rush Limbaugh, who I thought would never receive a Presidential Medal of Freedom, and yet whom did, right? Who did, elevated these kind of influencers like and others to this level of influence. And now we have elected officials who either have cowardice and would never challenge Trump because they believe that their political livelihood relies on their identification with him, or it would be political suicide. And then a base who literally, and I say this, and I know you know this, Kenny, you just have my man, Dr. Jerome on, the old biblical, the old story that they would tell is expressed biblically about the man who lives next to his neighbor. And each night he gets on his knees and he prays to God. And he says, "What do you want? What are you praying for?" And he goes, God answers his prayer and he goes, what do you need? What can I do to help you? And he says, "Do you want a cow?" And he goes, "No, kill my neighbor's cow." So rather than ask for something of his own or to think about how to build his own, he's more interested in inflicting maximum harm and suffering on his neighbor. And that's what this moment feels like to me. And you've got a Supreme Court, because Trump was, again, partly lucky and partly masterful in selecting Supreme Court nominees who would pursue this policy, two of whom I would argue after January 6th, there were significant questions about their complicity. One of them being Clarence Thomas, at least complicity in terms of their relatives or they themselves displaying signs or other things that would indicate that they were in support of or in sympathy with the J6 rioters and Trump getting another term. And then a Congress which is just evidence to lack of leadership and, quite frankly, cowardice. The great art of statescraft as we knew it, as imperfect as it was, is dead in this moment. And you just have individuals who are sycophants, cowards, and who have no respect for, either they have no respect for the architecture of the republic, or they themselves are just depraved and interested in killing the cow rather than seeing it, seeing that aspirational language actually live and be meaningful.
I'm talking this afternoon with Dr. Yohuru Williams. He is Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and Founding Director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. And we're very delighted that he's joined us this afternoon to be able to share perspective on a variety of things that are happening, especially because he's in such close proximity in Minneapolis that we are able to really get a deeper understanding. I want to ask you about this because you hear this a lot, that a lot of what the occupant of 1600 Avenue's game plan is to destabilize society to the point that there will not be, well, two things, that either there'll be a civil war of some type, whatever that is and however that's defined, or that there will not be midterm elections. And I want you to respond to that also in light of what recently happened in Fulton County, Georgia, and how serious that is. Once again, a thing that I think is extremely serious that a lot of people just kind of are sleeping on right now.
Kenny, I think, because when we talked about playbook earlier, you could almost have telegraphed what played out, because he continues the myth of the big lie. Last week in Davos, he tells European leaders, the participants of that summit, that big news is to come about him finally getting retribution or justice for the stolen election and how big he wants. He continues to repeat that over and over. And he's simply trying to build pretext for a greater usurpation of executive power. He believes he has a Supreme Court that will rubber stamp it. And we've seen moments of, and I won't call them vulnerability, I'll call them intentionality, where Voldemort will, the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue will say, they'll impeach me if we don't win the election. You've got to support this. And so he knows that, and I don't think any of us suffer under the delusion that he would not assume that executive power without pretext. but I think he'd like the pretext because whether he admits it or not, the narrative matters to him, or he wouldn't continue to repeat it. There's something about him. He's willing to violate the rules. He's willing to violate the Constitution and to behave in ways that are fundamentally depraved. And yet it's very important for him to appear to be innocent in all of it, right? I have a good friend, Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs, the Ojibwe, the Mohican tribe, but who does indigenous history. And he always says, whiteness needs to be innocent. So, white folks have this desire to, in the presentation of their history, always say, it's the American narrative. We were minding our business and we were attacked without warning. And all of our history speaks to that. September 11th, we were attacked without warning. The Alamo, we were attacked without warning. World War II, Pearl Harbor, we were attacked without warning. It happens so often that it becomes part of the way in which Americans justify. And so then when we look at Venezuela, right, or Greenland, it all is framed by this president in terms of an unwarranted and unjustified attack on the U.S. or a desire for security that requires, and most of the time it simply hides naked aggression or ambition that have been detrimental in very deeply meaningful ways. So I say all of that to say that in kind of watching all this play out, clearly the president is looking for a reason. It's like the movie with Clint Eastwood from back in the day, go ahead, make my day, Minnesota. But he's been checked. He'd hoped that Minnesota would have descended at this point into violence. That would have provided pretext then to send in the National Guard here, invoke the Insurrection Act, and then say, there can't be elections because I can't guarantee the security of the elections because of violence. That hasn't happened. I think he wants to provoke the same in other communities. And I think if Minnesota continues to hold out, we'll witness one of three things in the next several weeks. I wouldn't even say months. A pivot away from this community, someplace where they believe they can get that spark. A foreign adventurism, some type of attack on a sovereign power someplace else in the world to divert attention, and then to try to rally people around the fact that we can't have elections when we're at war. We need continuity of the government in order to prosecute that war or whatever it may be. Or third, just a naked usurpation of power by the executive, which I don't put past Trump. I mean, we've watched the demolition of part of the White House, the closing of the Kennedy Center. At the end of the day, I don't think that he believes that there are any limitations on him. And again, if not for his vanity in desiring to say, I won the election, I think he'd just take it. Now, he's willing to take it and try to clean it up and whitewash the history and take the plaque down. And take that asterisk there. But I still believe that in the end, if presented with that alternative, he'll just assume power. He'll just take power.
I mean, we once thought that the worst thing that was said was I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and get away with it. And we've seen so much more since that time that we actually believe that there's nothing that this person would not do or consider in the name of holding on to power, in the name of controlling circumstances and situations. And then we have the Epstein files. Talk to me a little bit about what you think this or how they play into this whole narrative.
They don't, Kenny. And that's what, I think there was a moment, and we remember this, Bill Clinton and how the Monica Lewinsky scandal tainted his presidency. He survived it, but the reality is that it tainted his legacy. And I think if he had been up for re-election, then that certainly would have been the death knell for his presidency. Impeachment or something, right? Trump has not only survived his association with Epstein, but the more information that comes out, he now has got a Department of Justice, which he refers to as his Department of Justice, that in the release of files eschews any sense of objectivity and says, well, we can't trust everything. This is insane. Like, we look at this and we go, the inmates are literally running the asylum at this point when you've got the DOJ officials who are saying this exonerates the president, or we've released everything. And if you read anything negative about him, it may not be true because anybody can call in. And yet, for his political enemies, be willing to wield that hammer to say, and this is proof positive that this person was associated with Epstein. But I believe at this point, it's a big, as one of my colleagues put it, a big nothing burger, because his base, for whatever reason, Marjorie Taylor Greene notwithstanding, are invested in this individual as the conduit, the instrument of their retribution. The irony of Adolf Hitler is that he spent like most dictators, this was true in Portugal, it was true in Germany, they distanced themselves from women, partly because they said they were too busy with the business of the state to be concerned with those things. And that created, or at least they used that to create a sense of devotion among the people. They had girlfriends. They were doing what they were doing, but they said that. And Hitler doesn't marry Eva Braun until, the very end, because that was part of the narrative that he built up. Ironically, here, you've got people making excuses for Trump's moral depravity and lewd behavior, in the sense that, well, it's kind of like King David. God will use, the instrument of his that doesn't have to be perfect. Now, I've always been uncomfortable with the moral perfection argument, but I'm more uncomfortable with the man who clearly is the devil, and you keep telling me there's not a 666 etched in the back of his head. So I think we're kind of an interesting moment, at least in terms of that. And for those of you who are, because I know sometimes people, you got all these cultural references, and I don't know what movie you're referring to. And I speak from that, from our experience, particularly folks who are Gen X and baby boomers. But I think millennials will understand it and beyond in these terms. When you have someone who is able to, in spite of the hypocrisy of their actions, present themselves as the only person who can deliver you from evil, you're in trouble. And Trump has done that masterfully. He has said to people, who better than to protect the sheep than I who was a fox? And that's dangerous.
Give me your perspective on Christian nationalism and its impact on what's happening right now.
I was just on a call with a couple of congressional staffers who are preparing for a hearing next week on the commemoration of America's 250th. And there was a tension here, Kenny. It was a great article in the New York Times last week about this battle that's now raging in the United States, and it's philosophical, but it's important, about what was the enterprise? Like, what did the founders intend for this to be? Were we to be a nation that is united by a civil theology around principles? Or is this a white Christian nation and, our fundamental identity is whiteness, whatever the heck that means, and Christian, right? And so on and so forth. So I'm going to answer that question. Clearly, the founders intended this to be the former and not the latter. There's abundant evidence in those documents themselves. There's abundant evidence in the safeguards they wrote into the Constitution about separation of church and state, that these things, they never envisioned that. In fact, they feared it, or they wouldn't have specifically named it, right? So it's like if you go to a restaurant and you know that you can't have onions, you tell the waitress, please, no onions and so when you see that in the order, in the menu, and the way that they have set out or created the ground rules for this democratic republic, and they say separation of church and state, I take them seriously, because to put those onions in means that somebody might have an allergic reaction, and the worst thing could be death. So they understood that the demise of the republic could pivot on someone coming in and making this argument for a theocracy. We were never intended to be that. And there's case law and precedent and founding documents to speak to that. The white Christian nationalists have powerfully aligned behind the Republican Party, the MAGA movement, the Tea Party, to put a religious and theological face on something that is neither godly or consistent with what we would associate with Christian principles. And yet they've done so expertly. And when you see, and the same thing happened in Brazil. So the United States is not unique in this context, but it's important for us to note this, that when you have someone like you have somebody like Bolsonaro in Brazil, who's able then to have the kind of conservative Christian imprint, who says, this guy, excuse my language, he's our SOB, as we used to say in terms of foreign policy. And Trump, he's our SOB. He's our instrument of white Christian. And we'll deal with him because ultimately we get the religious state and the state of affairs that we want in the end. You're in trouble. We're in deep trouble. So I have a real problem with white Christian nationalism. I think that individuals who are not aware of the tenets or the ways in which, if we go back to the 1980s and we see this intentional cultivation of this relationship and affiliation with the Republican Party and all the anti-intellectualism, which gets dressed up in ways that are cartoonish. So they're like, oh, well, our problem is with LGBTQ+. Well, then what's your problem with the truth, right? So because that's the way that it gets played out, is that, well, we're attacking the liberal ideology in the university. What's the liberal ideology in the university? That we question everything and that we invite inquiry? No, well, you have a woke agenda. If the woke agenda is to question, then guilty, because that's what it means to question things. To sleepwalk would be to assume that, as one girl who's suing a university. I don't have the citation for you on this because I read it and I laughed so hard I couldn't believe it. But was trying to sue her professor because she quoted the Bible and wanted that to be counted as is it justifiable? So again, separation of church and state. If those are your beliefs, you're entitled to those beliefs, and no one has the right to challenge those beliefs. But in public discourse, right, that is not the place, because the founders understood that inevitably could lead to conflict that would erode the architecture of a republic, dependent on people coming from different cultures, dependent on pluralism, being able to work together with a faith and a civil theology that says what binds us is we can come from whatever faith, but what we respect and what we agree to is we hold these truths to be self-evident. We've compacted together to form this government, and we believe that these things are sacrosanct. And here's the rule book that we've adopted, and we're going to play by these rules. Either we're playing checkers or we're playing chess, and you can't play both.
I want to talk a little bit about another deeply disturbing reality, and that is the billionaire takeover of media. And I'm just going to share a few of these for folks that are listening. We have the Ellison brothers with CBS News, Paramount, Pluto, TikTok. We got Zuckerberg, of course, with his empire, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, WhatsApp. Jeff Bezos, the Washington Post, Twitch, Prime Video, and more. The Murdoch family with Fox, Tubi, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes kind of on and on and on. And clearly there's this sense that if these individuals who are aligned with the current agenda, then there's going to be the potential for greater suppression of information. People who are on social media already fear the algorithms and are always constrained by them. But there seems to be a more ominous kind of potential here because of who's controlling access to those particular platforms. Your thoughts on that?
Many, Kenny. A couple of things, and I'm going to be disjointed here, but so please stop me if I'm all over the place. But I'm going to try to do them in some semblance of order. First, the existential threat posed by artificial intelligence, married to a media that is fueled by algorithms, in which we're moving increasingly toward not only partisan networks and reporting. We've always had that. You can go back to the founders, and there were newspapers that spoke for a particular political faction, and that was evident in that day. But if we think about it in terms of our contemporary moment, when you have billionaires who own these outlets, who then genuflect to the Oval Office, that's a different, then you're moving towards state-controlled. Party-controlled or party-leaning or politically leaning, fine. As a consumer of information, I have a choice. And I can consume from one, the other, or multiple to try to find truth. When you concentrate that in the hands of Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post, and the Washington Post breaks with tradition of endorsing a president, right? So some people say, well, newspapers shouldn't have been endorsing candidates. They've always done that. And part of the way that they did that, at least in the beginning, was acknowledging factionalism, and then later on saying, now that we've evolved, we've looked at the issues. And so after evaluating the issues and everything the candidates have said based on a variety of things, we believe that this candidate offers a more authentic agenda or program, and therefore they earn our endorsement. That's how that worked.
Mm-hmm.
And they would disagree, and that was good for the American people because it promoted discourse. I think the other danger is that we are witnessing the erosion of the democratization of information. So now we have these wonderful tools at our disposal where we have access to information. And in one moment, that was incredible because it meant that, you remember the old days, Kenny, when we were kids, if you were writing a term paper on Saturday afternoon and the library was closed, you wait until Monday morning before you can get into the library to get that book that you need, and you got to pray that somebody else hasn't taken it out.
That's right.
Now our kids can say, do, and everything is here but then that means whoever controls this controls what you can see, controls how it's framed, controls how it's served up and delivered, has power that is something that we should all be deeply concerned about.
Yeah.
This weekend on Friday, I was at a press conference for Georgia Fort, the independent journalist who was arrested by the Department of Justice for that protest at a church that she was covering. And at that press conference, I talked about how an independent press is not ornamental, right? Independent journalism is essential, particularly in a moment when legacy media is under assault, and we watched it fold. The lawsuit against CBS, the Trump using the federal, our tax dollars being utilized by the Department of Justice to carry out the whims of a vindictive chief executive who has weaponized the Department of Justice is insane, and yet that's the moment we're in. So I've been saying to people consistently, and this is probably beyond the question you asked me, but I've been saying this to folks, we need to get back, particularly in the Black community, particularly in those communities that are most aggrieved, get back on the radio. Independent voices whom you can trust, who are willing to bring you a variety of issues, or quite frankly, even those who aren't, but are willing to bring on and to talk about the truth. We still control those spaces. There's still some, I'm not mentioning you because I'm on your program now, but I've mentioned you many times. There are incredible individuals committed to truth that are operating in spaces that right now ain't nobody paying attention to because they don't get that this is the Underground Railroad in 2026. The pipeline for information exists in these spaces. So if you really want to be in the know, go analog and get rid of the digital. And you might discover that on those radio waves, we can build community that can help us resist.
I love all of that. Blockbuster report from the editorial board of the New York Times last week. Headline: How Trump used the presidency to pocket $1,408,500,000. And the board basically said this, I'll quote them: the president has never been a man to ask what he can do for his country. In his second term, as in his first, he is instead testing the limits of what his country can do for him. A review by the editorial board, relying on analyses from news organizations, shows that Mr. Trump has used the office of the presidency to make at least $1.4 billion. That is absolutely stunning, not surprising, but stunning to hear something like that. And then, as you just noted, how he has utilized and weaponized the Department of Justice to go after certain people and suing them and benefiting from those kinds of things is absolutely insane. I know you would agree with that.
Agree. And I mean, the numbers are astronomical. But I remember as a kid, I used to think to myself, how much does the president make? How much do governors make? And when I actually saw the numbers, I think back in the day when I first asked that question was Ronald Reagan. I think the president made $250,000 a year, which back then seemed astronomical to me, like a lot of money. I think about that now, and I'm like, what this chief executive has done is criminal. And it'll be hard, like the level of graft and corruption. But what's stunning to me is the lack of accountability and the willful and deliberate way in which he celebrates and flaunts it in the face of the American people. But I do believe, Kenny, and there's something to be said for this. You know, I would love to have dinner with you and Dr. Jerome at some point and have this conversation. How strong that impulse of kill my neighbor's cow is, that literally people see that and they go, that's fine. As long as those federal workers aren't taking my dime, that's okay. As long as these black people are not out here getting benefits that they don't deserve, that's fine. As long as there's no Obamacare and no one's going to live longer than they should possibly live because they've got kind of a floor in terms of health insurance reform. That's fine as long as gas prices are $2.59. And I don't care how many people we invade to have slightly cheaper gas prices, even though it may mean a Truth and Reconciliation Commission 30 years from now to rectify the evil that we've done in overthrowing this. You don't think about any of that. And so for me, it is both a philosophical and a moral question that only individuals, not of moral perfection, but with the willingness and intestinal fortitude to ask those questions, can take on. I don't see a lot of them in public life right now. Yeah. And we need spaces increasingly. I heard Dr. Jerome say, for example, he says, look, I'm not selling my book on Bezos's platform because I'm not trying. Now, I love that brother, and I've had the opportunity to work with him. I just think that that's the kind of grassroots thinking that we need to be applying now. And, maybe 2 or 3 of us don't make a difference. But if you get to 2,000 or 3,000, if we can blow up this platform, if we can, this fool took, the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue took over Truth Social. He didn't like what Twitter was doing. He created his own. There's a model in that, and there's a method in that for all of us. And if we then take the lessons of the civil rights movement, they stayed off those buses in Montgomery for almost a year, 365 days. If I can commit to creating and generating revenue for platforms that exist independently, then I'm ensuring 3 things. Independent voice, which means the opportunity for real truth or at least discourse, and that the money that I'm spending is not going to support a regime that by its very nature is tempting to erode those protections and guarantees, which are supposed to be the glue or the anchor of this compact. So for me, I think about all those things working in concert to say, he made $1.x billion. What are we doing to claw some of that back? And think very concretely in terms of, because waiting for this to be resolved for an 80-year-old, the reality is by the time this is resolved, he's not going to be on the planet. And I'm not saying that because I wish any harm on him. I'm just stating the obvious fact. At 80 years old, he's not going to be here for the comeuppance that people believe that one day will come. So we have to start thinking post him so this doesn't happen again. Maybe there was a value in when we really kind of invested in, and I give the kids in a way through social media have this, except that they're on platforms in order to do that. We have to think about deplatforming the platforms and find ways to elevate people and community so we can help them build influence, and that influence can help safeguard our liberties.
I love that. We've got about 6 minutes left, and I could not let you get away without reflecting on the 100th anniversary of celebrating Black history in this nation, starting out as Black History Week and then month. And I just want to ask you in this point in time that there'll be a celebratory mood, of course, around this, in spite of all the pushback and all of the attempts to erase and so much more. What is this moment in reflecting on the 100th anniversary drawing us or calling us to as a people?
I spent a lot of time thinking about this, Kenny. And I'm gonna say this, and it may take me a minute to get cooking. I know we only have a few minutes left.
It's all right.
The problem with Black History Month, at least since I was a kid, because there was a discernible shift, it moved away from this celebration of the ways in which people of African descent helped build this country to a celebration of famous firsts. So it was driven by celebrity as opposed to being driven by principle and by elevating those things in community. Because most of those stories when we were kids, I'm saying pre-1986, 1987, where it was like Sojourner Truth because of what Sojourner Truth did in community and with community. It was Martin Luther King because of Martin Luther King did with community and in community. And then at some point it became this guy or this woman because she was the first Black person to. And so we got more Nicki Minaj and less Ella Baker. in this moment, we need to kind of get back to a celebration of Black history that is more aligned with what Carter Woodson intended with the inauguration of Negro History Week, which was to remind the American people what the Niagara Movement did in the Declaration of Sentiments from 1905. Look, this nation has always been dependent, not only on the blood, sweat, and tears, the labor of Black folks, but on Black folks being on the front line of protecting and making the aspirational language and its foundational documents mean something. The only way that any of that has ever meant something is because we've been here to contest the hypocrisy, the paradox, the insufficiency of the commitment to the things that were articulated and not lived up to. I said to someone when they were talking about Renee Nicole Good's murder, and the Justice Department came out and called her all kinds of things, her and her wife. I said, the interesting thing is we're coming up on Black History Month. John Adams defended the British soldiers who shot into the people who were menacing those soldiers that became known as the Boston Massacre. He called those individuals a motley crew of saucy boys, mulattoes, Negroes, Irish Teagues, and Jack Tars. So he literally said, to quote the philosopher Kendrick, "They not like us." So he's literally saying in that moment, the Negroes and the Black people, the mulattoes did this, right? So if that's the truth, then we should be celebrating the ways in which we were the foundation of the America. They caught up eventually and realized, hey, those guys in the street, the Negroes, the mulattoes, the Jack Tars, they were right. And then they capitalized on that and built the Republic, articulating values that reflected that, but have never lived up to it. A celebration of Black history should never stop with famous firsts. It should be about those who have done with and in community incredible things to not only elevate Black folks, but also safeguard this democracy, safeguard this, as imperfect as it is. And then you'd have a much more expansive, because, there's some people that get overlooked every year. And for me, I'm like, I'm tired of hearing about the guy that, created the Super Soaker. And it just becomes trivia. And it becomes less about convincing young people as we were when we were young, Kenny. I know you and I talk about it. Man, this is so important, right? We celebrated individuals because we saw with them a pathway to excellence and to opportunity and to contribution. That's what Black History Month has to get back to.
Yeah. And I know we're running short of time, but I was sharing with someone the other day that I think that Black History Month is a great time to revisit some of the values that we talk about during Kwanzaa. The idea of supporting Black businesses, the idea of coming together as family and strengthening our community through volunteer service, and just ways that we can intentionally approach it where it's not just, as you said, this celebration. We're looking for that thing on TV or the Black History movies that come on and that kind of thing, and just compact it into that. I love the celebration. I love the acknowledgement, the affirmation. But if it's not really building and allowing us to experience more, then perhaps we're missing an opportunity in the process.
So, Kenny, I'm going to tell you now, because you just, I needed to write a piece for The Progressive, and I'm going to cite you, because that's exactly what I'm going to write about.
Wow.
Absolutely right, that we need to take those principles from Kwanzaa. And this year in particular, this 100th anniversary, it should really be about, I love what you said. You go on Turner Classic Movies and watch, the celebration of Black movies. But as you're watching it, look to see whether they reflect those principles that we celebrate during Kwanzaa. Go ahead and read those great works of the poetry of an Audre Lorde or Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. But lean in and see if you can extract or see some of that, that architecture. Sure. That to me would be a celebration of Black History Month that wouldn't just be about this trivia. It would be about activism.
Yeah. And the clock runs out. It's like, February 1st, 28th, the clock runs out and it's like, okay, I'm just moving on with life. And we should never be in that space. We should always be carrying it forward throughout the year. What an amazing conversation this afternoon with Dr. Yohuru Williams, blessing me with an hour conversation here. I so appreciate it. He's Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and the founding director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas. He joins me from time to time, and as I said, he elevates my platform whenever he comes. I'm so grateful to you and your investment in this process. Thank you so much. I look forward to our next conversation.
Appreciate you, brother. You know, Alexandra just peeked in to see what you were wearing. And she told me, don't come on your program like this today. We love you, brother. Thank you for everything that you do.
Love you all too. Take care, man.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Dr. Yohuru Williams joining us this afternoon. We certainly appreciate him whenever he gets a chance to stop by and visit with us. I'm going to come back in just a moment with more of our broadcast. I'm Kenny Anderson. It's Second Chance. Hope you're having a great day.
You're listening to Second Chance with Kenny Anderson.
You may or may not know that today is Super Bowl Sunday, and of course, it's a big day for a lot of people. Of course, if you are a Seattle Seahawks fan, if you are a New England Patriots fan, this is the day for you. I love the Super Bowl. I remember the very first one, in fact, that took place in 1967. Yes, I watched the first Super Bowl game. And it's amazing how much has changed since that time, from commercials that at that time ran for right around $35,000, $36,000 per 30-second commercial. That has now gone up to $8 million for a 30-second commercial. The first Super Bowl was not even a sellout, folks. A lot of people don't know that it was viewed by about 50 million people. Today it's viewed by about 125 plus million people. And so lots of things have changed over the years, and hope you enjoy the game on this afternoon. Dr. Roland Hill is CEO and president of the International Association of Godpreneurs Foundation. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to be able to share some time with him. Dr. Hill, how are you doing this afternoon? Are you on mute?
I'm doing extremely well, ecstatic, happy, and overflowing with joy. Thank you for asking, sir.
Wow, that's a lot of space for some really, really positive energy. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because you got a big event that's coming up here in Huntsville in just a few weeks. I want to talk about the event, and then I want to talk about what inspired the event. So the event is going to take place on February the 18th, and it's called The Bible Has an Economy. And it's a public conversation that we're inviting you, the listening community, out. And we hope that lots and lots of people will invest time in this particular space, especially again during Black History Month, as we look for positive ways to experience the process. Dr. Hill, I am excited about this. Perhaps you're the only person more excited than I am about this, because when you shared this concept with me and where it came from, I really got excited and wanted to make sure we had a chance to talk about it. So just talk generally about what this public conversation is, and then we'll also kind of extract from that where this whole gathering came from.
Sure. We're talking about God having an economy. And when you read the Bible consistently, you cannot you have to come away with the understanding that God is the source and God has the economy. So I see this as, simply put, the Bible has an economy. And that means God doesn't govern creation with just simply ideas alone. He governs it with systems and real sources to sustain it. And the sad thing about it is most believers do not even see that God has an economy. And what's interesting, I'm a pastor, retired pastor. Mm-hmm. And, we're inviting people into the kingdom of God. And we leave them with the idea that the only way they can make it is in human systems. I think I need to say that again.
You do need to say it again.
We invite people into the kingdom of grace. God says, I have an economy to provide for you. I heard your brother in the previous podcast, and he was saying some powerful stuff. And what God showed me is that he has an economy that works with anybody, anywhere, to carry out the mission for their life if they would only believe it.
Let me ask you this question, because there are people listening right now who are already equating economy with money, because they're thinking about economy, they're thinking about economics, they're thinking about a literal translation of what that represents to so many people. You've aligned this concept of an economy with God and the Bible. Talk about what you mean by this. Expand on this just a little bit. And as you do that, just kind of tell us a little bit about the backstory, because this kind of came to you in a vision and a dream. And I think the backstory to where people land is always fascinating and a part of that story as well.
Well, the first thing I want to say, this is a conversation. When is that? February 28th. We're going to have this public conversation, which is the first opportunity for me to really go public with allowing people to talk about the source of all economies, the one who sustains economies, and the reason why we can prosper even in difficult times. And it's exciting to me because I do believe that the God of the Bible is a God that created the world. And as a result, he holds himself responsible for its continued prosperity and flourishing. Now, the interesting thing about the economy of God, it's not just about money, but it is about money, because money is just a means of providing. And so God says, listen, I want you to know that I'm the source of whatever happens on the planet, and I will use whatever I need to use to supply the needs of humanity. I was looking at the Word of God the other day, and it struck me clearly. Philippians chapter 4, verse 19 says, my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory. He was telling the people in Philippi, he said, listen, God's going to supply your need, but it's not going to be dependent on what you can see. It's going to be based on what I have said and what I can provide for you over and beyond what you can see, which allowed me to see that there was indeed a separate economy, a super economy that stands separate and apart from all human economies. Let me walk it back. And he says, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to take care of you regardless of what human systems may say or even do.
Is the concept of, and I'm trying to get somewhere here, because I'm actually in this moment, I'm a listener. So I'm kind of like out there, I'm in the audience. I'm like, the Bible has an economy. That's not, I've never really heard people talk about the Bible that way. I've never really heard about people talk about God that way. And so, and we're not going to give people everything you're going to share with them. We want to tease them a little bit so they'll come and hear what you have to share. But generally, I would imagine you believe that most people don't have their spiritual lens aligned with this concept or this principle as you do.
You used the correct term, Kenny, lens. We read the Bible with the lens of spirituality. We read the Bible with the lens of principles to make it in life. We read the Bible for doctrines to guide our spiritual life, but we don't see that underneath everything is the economy of God. And when we talk about economy, we're talking about the source, we're talking about distribution, we're talking about sustaining. All of these things are involved in economy, which revolves around resources. Okay. And when you look in the Bible, what you see is that God started the whole creation account with a resource. And he says, in the beginning, God. So he says, I'm setting up for you an understanding that I don't create without providing. I don't bring something into existence without preparing for it. That would will be needed to sustain it. So when you start changing your view and start seeing the Bible, here it is. When you start seeing the Bible with the lens of economics, then you begin to see God operating to provide in every circumstance. Now, it's interesting that we're doing this during the Black History Month, because I'm a Black pastor. And the deeper I got into understanding the economy of God, the more I understood how the Black church in America has survived. Should I take it a little further?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, all right. Doing segregation, Jim Crow, and all of the things that blocked us out of the economic system, Black people still prospered. So I'm on the front line of ministry, and I'm watching God, in spite of how we were left out, God still provided. When you look back in our history, I heard the brother talk about the water gun that the guy came up with. Well, that began with an idea, okay? And God says, I provide my ideas to sustain the planet, to sustain people, oppressed people. It doesn't matter. I give them ideas to create. See, at the end of the day, wealth is the allocation and assignment of value. And it is God that gives value, and he gives value by giving us ideas to take into the world to create and innovate. And when you look at the history of Black people, innovating in the most difficult and oppressed situations, and yet we continue to innovate. That's God. When you look at the Black church, you see we had no access to banks. We had no ability to do much of anything, and yet community came together and provided. So the Black church becomes a primary place to see the economy of God in operation. Let me make it clear. This is not something new and revolutionary. It's just simply saying, all we need to do is look in the Word of God, and we see where God has always been behind the scene, providing resources for creation. So that's how I can talk about economics and economy.
Yeah. I want to ask you this because I want to say something. I want to ask you something. So it sounds like many people, if not most people, are actually experiencing the economy of God without necessarily naming the economy of God. And that there's perhaps going to be something about what you share that will allow them to further contextualize that experience for their benefit. Am I right about that?
Oh, no, you're right on target, sir. We're talking about something that is in operation right now. Mm-hmm. It is a part of our everyday experience. Mm-hmm. All right. When the Word of God talks about Christ in you, the hope of glory, he's literally saying, I put my economy inside of you. I was asked the other day, how do you access the economy of God? All right. And it became clear to me that we don't access the economy of God, because that says that there's gates and things you got to do to get in. And God says, no, you are brought into it. You are invited into it. You are in it. You abide in it. Mm-hmm. So yes, the economy of God is something that all we need to do is recognize it.
And as we recognize it, of course, we can leverage it in a more positive and powerful way. But Dr. Roland Hill is talking with us this afternoon. He's CEO president of the International Association of Godpreneurs Foundation. We're talking about a very special event that's going to take place at the North Huntsville Library, which is also known as the Sherney Center, at the corner of Sparkman Drive and Pulaski Pike. Some of you know that beautiful facility over there in the Grand Hall, or the main conference room. Now, I said the 18th because it was on the flyer, but you said the 28th. I want to make sure we're giving people a right.
No, it's the 18th. It's the 18th.
Okay. It is the 18th. Mm-hmm. And it is a public conversation. I'm putting it on my schedule right now. I'm listening. I'm excited about this. What can I expect to experience when I come?
You can expect, I call it a conversation. because this is not one of the subjects that we talk about on a regular basis. Most people have never even thought about the economy of God. And it's interesting, we live in economy, we exercise in an economy, but we never talk about economy. We live in human economies right now, capitalism, socialism, or fascism, whatever you want to call them. We live inside of them, but we don't think of them as economies. So when you come, you're going to understand what economies really do. At the end of the day, economics is about philosophy. It's about how you think about how you live. It's about what you believe about the source of everything that is provided. So you're going to learn how to look at the world from an economic standpoint. And then you're going to discover that God has been active. And this is what excited me, Ken. The deeper I got into this, the more I saw that God's economy intersects with every human economy in the world, every human economy in the world. And as a result, we can see him in action. And at the conversation that we have on the 18th, we're going to be talking about how we see God acting from Genesis to Revelation. We won't get into a deep part of it, but at least we'll start introducing it so that when you read the Bible, and here it is, when we read the Bible, we will get a chance to see God acting. Maybe let me give you an illustration because I think it's good. So we're coming up on tax day, April 1, and we get concerned about taxes. Now, taxes are not new. In the days of Jesus, there were taxes. So Peter comes to Jesus and he said, Jesus, I need our taxes. We can't pay them. What are we going to do? Jesus says, don't be alarmed. And by the way, in the days of Jesus, taxes were high, even higher now because they had church tax. The church didn't allow you to volunteer. Oh, I feel like shouting on that. Okay. It was a tax. Okay. And then there was a government tax. So it was a high tax situation. Peter gets alarmed because he's no longer fishing. He's following Jesus. And he's trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Or what are we going to do to pay the taxes? And Jesus says, Peter, haven't you been with me long enough to see that I fed 5,000 with a little boy's lunch, and the next week I fed 4,000? Haven't you seen that I have a different economy? So since you haven't seen it yet, I want you to go fishing. And the first fish you pull up, you're going to pull up a 4 drachma coin, enough to pay my tax and your tax. Now watch this now. There had never been a coin found in a fish's mouth before then, and it hasn't happened since then. That's the economy of God. God can put into economies any denomination of money, any type of currency, to do what he chooses to do because he is God. In fact, his economy is based on who he is and his ability to create what we call ex nihilo, from nothing. So you're going to discover those kinds of things at the conversation. Then we're going to give time for questions because, one of the things I discovered, and I learned this in my earlier years as a pastor, when you're pastoring, and this is Black history, and so this is really prominent for us to understand. I'm pastoring people who are blocked out of the economic system. And I'm wondering how to get the gospel to them. And then that's when God began to show me, I need to show them that I'm already in action, providing for them. I have my own economy. So I went and searched to find it out. And in fact, when I started the research, my professors said, this is a great topic, but we can't help you because no one has ever done it. And so I'm excited to be able to present this understanding of scripture that shows God, and here's the bottom line, as the ultimate resource for everything that happens in the world. I call it the third rail. It is the power source behind everything. And they will discover that at this conversation.
the conversation that we're referencing is The Bible Has an Economy, a public conversation that will take place on February the 18th. The time is from 6 to 7:30 at the North Huntsville Library right here in Huntsville, Alabama. For those who don't know where it is, the address is 3011 Sparkman Drive. It's fairly at the intersection of Sparkman and Pulaski Pike, and just lots of parking. Beautiful facility. If you haven't been there before, it might be a great time to come by and check it out. Is there a certain population that you are pitching this to, Dr. Hill?
You're asking an excellent question. I'm concerned about people in general, okay? But I am concerned about thought leaders, because we need to move to a point of teaching people how to see the economy of God. But it's open to everybody, because, you know, I've had the privilege of pastoring people on the front line. And when I open to them the economy of God, many of them catch it right off, because they know that there were things that happened in their life to provide for them that was beyond what they could have imagined and done themselves. They knew that there was a higher power involved in making sure that their needs were taken care of. So they catch it, because now there is a name, here it is, there is a name for what they have experienced. And that's what this session is all about. We're putting a name to what people have already experienced, and knowing that there is a resource that's beyond what we can see that provides for them.
And I would imagine when you say thought leaders, we're talking about people who are within the context of some religious or faith experience, a pastor, ministry leader, a teacher, other people who might be in the community who have faith-based initiatives, and there are a ton of them in this community. I'm a member of one, for example, a board member of Habitat for Humanity, and we are a faith-based organization that actually tithes. And so when you think about the opportunity that exists for people to come to this particular free public conversation, it's called The Bible Has an Economy, on February the 18th from 6 to 7:30 at the North Huntsville Library. This is an open call to whoever wants to come. And even, I said pastors and ministry leaders, I'm talking about whether you're identified or not identified, you can be called to minister and no one knows that the calling has been placed upon you yet, because you don't necessarily have a pulpit or a public ministry, but maybe that's where God is drawing you, and this might be a great space for people to come. So I would imagine that this is a space that will welcome people who are, as we often say, from 8 to 88.
Well, let me jump in here, Kenny. Let me jump in, because we're having this at a library, not a church.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Because this discussion is not about religion and church.
Sure.
This is about an economy that functions for CEOs and major corporations.
Mm-hmm.
It's an economy that works for nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
It's an economy that works for school systems.
Okay.
What I've come to understand with the economy of God, it is here to help us maximize what we have available to us, and then take advantage of that which we don't even see.
Mm-hmm.
Let me back up into this again. This is not about church. This is about a God who says, God so loved the world. So that means he loves everybody in the world. He says, my economy provides for everybody in the world. And I want to show you how to tap into it so that you can maximize your flourishing, even in the most difficult places in the world. See, one of the things that got me excited about this concept, I've traveled in some of the countries of the world, and they're looking for an economic philosophy that will allow them to be empowered in their situation. And what we teach in theoeconomism, what's called the gross national well-being. The wealth of a nation is not in its products, but in its people. And when people are allowed to see that the economy of God first empowers them, they become the innovators that drive production in their country and in their community. And that's why I said that in the Black community, it has been the economy of God that has driven the flourishing that we're experiencing. If you remember, the Black church has always been the economic engine of the Black community. And the reason why is because while we couldn't give a name to the economy, we knew that there was something else. You heard it in our songs. You heard it in our prayers. We heard it in our sermons. We always said, you know, there is a God somewhere, okay? And we knew that if we trusted God, God would do the miraculous for us. And we couldn't put a name on what we were experiencing. So God now says, here it is. It's called theoeconomics. It's God's economy that connects to the world in any place. That's why I use the word third rail, because the third rail says God is connected, listen now, and he will never disconnect himself from the world that he created. Matthew 5:45 says, I allow my sun and my rain to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. In other words, God says, I don't deliver resources based on your behavior. I deliver resources based on my love. And what we're outlining in this public presentation, that the deeper you understand the economy of God, not just money and principles for doing well, but the economy of God, the deeper you understand the unconditional love for God for this world that he created.
That's beautiful. Tell people one final time, as we have about 2 minutes, one final time, where can they get information about this? Tell us where it is and then when they can get information about it.
You can get it from, I'm glad you asked that question. I don't know if you can email me. That would be the best thing.
All right.
It's Roland J. Hill at att.net. Okay, Roland J. Hill at att.net. And it's going to be at the North Huntsville Library. As you said, Kenny, it's a beautiful place, plenty of parking. And it's, again, open to everybody. I'm looking for people to come. This is a new concept, brother. Yeah. And I promise those who come, they will leave inspired, one, and empowered, two, because it helps each individual to see that God has in his economy a place for their flourishing and prosperity.
That's a great way to wrap it up. It is The Bible Has an Economy, February 18th, 6 to 7:30 at the North Huntsville Library, 3011 Sparkman Drive. Dr. Roland J. Hill will be facilitating, and you can reach him at rolandjhill at att.net to get more information. We, of course, will have it on our Second Chance page on Facebook. That's the number 2ND Chance. Also go on to Instagram, and you'll see the 2ND Chance page, as well as some clips of my conversation with Dr. Hill. So you definitely want to check that out on Instagram. Dr. Hill, thank you so much for joining me today. We look forward to seeing you soon.
All right.
What a great conversation, or slate of conversations I had today, folks. I'm just, wow. I'm just so fortunate and blessed, every week to be able to have these kinds of conversations, and look forward to future opportunities. Dr. Roland Hill, CEO, President of the International Association of Godpreneurs Foundation, joining me for a conversation about that very important event that's coming up. We hope that you and as many of you will take advantage of that. Dr. Yohuru Williams, Distinguished University Chair and Professor of History and Founding Director of the Racial Justice Initiative at the University of St. Thomas, joining me this afternoon for a great conversation. I certainly appreciate that. And then, of course, Dr. Jerome Crichton joining me. He's the author of Spitting in the Wind, White Pathology and the Struggle for Racial Habilitation. This is a power-packed show, folks. I would invite you to share this with others. I would invite you to let people know when you see the promo that it's going to happen so that they can join in on the conversation. And again, you can go to Second Chance, 2ND Chance on the Instagram page, and you can see clips of the conversations that I have with my guests. I hope that you join us on next Sunday for my conversation with the What's Going On Social and Political Roundtable. Joining me once again, I expect my commentators to be David Person, Dr. Keith Burton, Stephen Foster, and Dr. Nosekeri Thomas. Another power-packed conversation, and I hope that you'll join me at that time. In the meantime, I hope that you have a great rest of the week. Remember, as always, knowledge is better than riches, and have a great afternoon. Go Seahawks!
Thank you for tuning in to Second Chance. We hope that the information that was shared has been a blessing to you and that your life will be enriched as a result of it. We'd love to hear from you, so please send your email comments to Kenneth Anderson at mxlife@aol.com. That's mxlife@aol.com. And check out our Facebook page, 2ND Chance. That's 2ND Chance. In the meantime, have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next week. Good day.